Nisim b'chol yom, everyday miracles. Miracles do happen. They happen every day around us all the time. We just don't always realize them. Elohai Neshama was about the creation of ourselves, that we are given a new soul every day, and every day is a chance to start over. And now, Nisim b'chol yom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'sekvivina le'avchin ben yom uben layla.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokea kivrim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokar haaretz al hamayim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzorki.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, amechin mitzadei gaver.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish harumim.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, anoten layaef koach.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, המעביר שינה מעיניי ותנומה מעפעפיי.
Page 128. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzelem Elohim.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשני בן חורין.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשני ישראל.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, עוזר ישראל בגבורה.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, עוטר ישראל בתפארה. Continue with the Ashrei. Actually, Baruch She'amar, sorry, the next page. Page 130. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh bereshit, Baruch omer ve'oseh, Baruch ozer u'mekayem, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch meshalem zakar tov nireah, Baruch ha'elahah, v'kayam la'netzach, Baruch borer u'mazil, Baruch shemo. We continue with Yashrei, page 132. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יללוך סדה.
אשרי העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו.
תהילה לדוד, ארומים אלוהי המלך, וברכה שמך לעולם ועד.
כל יום אברכך, הללה שמך לעולם ועד.
גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, ולגדולתו אין חקר.
כל עדו ישבח מעשיך, וגבורותיך יגידו.
הדר כבודך, ודברי נפלותיך שיחה.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו, וגבולתך ספרנה.
זכר על כתובך יביאו, וצדקתך ירננו.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערב כפיים גדול חסד.
טוב אדוני לכל, ורחמיו על כל מעשיו.
ידעוך אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך.
כבוד מלכותך יאמרו, גבורתך ידברו.
יביא לבני האדם גבורותיו, וכבוד האדם מלכותו.
מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור.
זומק אדוני לכל הנופלים, זוכף לכל הכפופים.
עיני כל אליך יסברו, ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם איתו.
פותח את ידיך, ומצביע לכל חי רצון.
צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
אדוני לכל קרב, וכל אשר נקראו באמת.
וצפון יראיו יעשה, ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיע.
אדוני אל כל אוהביו, אל כל הרשעים ישמיע.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, יברא כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יה
142 for the Baruch Hu, and we rise.
Continue with the Yotzer, page 144.
142. Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer or uvorei choshech, Aseh shalom uvorei et hakol, or olam beotzar chayim, orot me'ofel amar vayehi. Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha berachamim, uftuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit, Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, mala'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha, titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yafa'arucha salah. Or chadash al tzion ta'ir, v'nizkechu lanu mehira le'oro, Baruch ata Adonai, yotzer ha'me'orot.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת פעם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לתותפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We continue on page 160. True and steadfast is this teaching, beloved and treasured, a source of wonder, a fount of goodness, a thing of beauty, and ours for all time. And true it is, the eternal God is our sovereign, the rock of Jacob, our protecting shield. Through all generations, God's name lives on. God's throne stands firm. God's dominion prevails. God's grandeur and faithfulness endure through eternity. God's words are precious. They will live forever. Amen. From Egypt you redeemed us, Adonai our God, and from the slave house you set us free. For this the people who felt your love exalted you, and the ones whom you found precious sang hymns of praise, blessing, and thanks to the living God who reigns forever, high and exalted, inspiring wonder, who humbles the proud and raises the lowly, who frees the captive, redeems the oppressed, and sustains the poor. God responds to the cry of our people, their prayer in time of need. Sing praise to God Most High, most blessed source of blessing, as Moses, Miriam, and all Israel sang this joyous song to you.
Shira דחינומך, יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, כל ישראל.
We rise for the tefillah.
Page 166.
We recite it only twice, once on Rosh Hashanah and the other time on Yom Kippur. And like all prayers, it speaks in metaphor. We are mortal, we are frail, people are born, they live, and they pass on. Some reach the ripeness of old age, others do not. who by fire, who by water, who by war, and who by beast, who shall live in poverty, who in prosperity, who shall be humbled, and who exalted. We are on trial. That's the metaphor of the high holy days. God sits on the throne of justice. God is Dayan Ha'emet, the judge of truth, recording and recounting our deeds, inscribing judgments. As the Unetana Tokev prayer speaks of judgment, I would like to dedicate a few minutes of our time together to the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice was her first name. Justice Ginsburg. How fortunate to be able to devote one's entire professional life to the pursuit of justice. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, the Torah commands. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And the word justice is repeated for emphasis. It was a verse that Ruth Bader Ginsburg quoted many times. I never met Justice Ginsburg personally, but when she died on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I felt personally bereft, as if a member of my family passed away. There are some human beings who fill such huge spaces in our lives that when they die, we can scarcely comprehend. God pours into these people some mysterious talent, some potent heavenly mixture. And all the rest of us simply stand in awe, basking in their reflected radiance. Her death should not have come as a surprise. She was in poor health for many years, and yet she survived challenge after challenge, illness after illness. She pulled through so many times that we almost forgot that she, like all of us, was mortal. That there would come a time that she would not prevail. And thus, we were shocked at receiving the news. She gave all she could. Every last drop of life's energy was entirely consumed. Nothing was left. She died on the bench. A good life, a life well lived, leaves a void. We feel this void today. We are in mourning. The Talmud tells of the death of Rabbi Safra. When he died, the rabbis of the academy did not rip their clothes, as is custom for Jewish families in mourning. They said that they did not rend their garments because they were not Rabbi Safra's next of kin. Rend your garments anyway, the rabbis instructed, because when a great teacher dies, all are next of kin. Every day, we consider their teachings and implement their judgments. Justice Ginsburg was such a formidable presence in the life of our country that many millions of Americans are in mourning today. It's not only that we worry about the direction of the country. It is that we felt in some way that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was our next of kin. We will consider her teachings and implement her judgments for decades to come. She was a daughter of our people who represented the best of us, She was a proud Jew. She often spoke about how Judaism's values, its sense of justice, formed and informed her. She wielded enormous influence in a quiet way. Every American girl, every American woman, and every American, man or woman, who cares about equality and dignity owes her eternal gratitude. She was ferocious in the pursuit of justice. A quiet, even introverted woman, slight and small, with this gigantic spirit, the spirit of a warrior. Her courage was indomitable, her determination indefatigable. What a magnificent soul. She was a giant, but a gentle giant. Her presence was large. She filled the voids, the empty spaces of life, but she did it in an utterly unique way. Some big personalities fill the room with color and noise. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was quieter. She was thoughtful. She was the type of woman who ennobled our spirit. She taught us about fairness, dignity, and decency. She taught us how to pursue justice relentlessly. Never give up. Never give up. The sages teach tzadikim af b'mitatam kruim chayim. The righteous ones, even in their death, are called alive. How so? Asked the sages. How can someone who is mortal and has passed away continue to live? Because their words live on. Their teaching lives on. Their example lives on. As the Jerusalem Talmud explains, we do not erect monuments to tzadikim. Divreihem hen zichrona. Their words are their memorial. Justice Ginsburg died on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. In Jewish tradition, the most righteous die on Rosh Hashanah. The final letter of the book of her life was written at the completion of the full additional year she was granted. God granted Ruth Bader Ginsburg every last possible moment between last Rosh Hashanah and this Rosh Hashanah, a full year, minus a couple of hours, in deference to the setting sun and the preparations to welcome the new year. There is a belief that when death occurs on the eve of a Jewish holiday, it is as if God himself descends from the heavens to kiss us home. God has descended from the heavens and kissed Ruth Bader Ginsburg to her heavenly reward, welcoming home a good and faithful friend. I envision God greeting her with these words. Well done, my servant, well done. Now it is time to rest. You inspired generations. Others can now pick up the torch and continue the work. We who are still on earth recite the ancient words of gratitude from the book of Ruth. Vayomru kol ha'am yiten Adonai et ha'isha ve'asachayil ve'tomarna hanashim Baruch Adonai. And all of the people said, may God bless Ruth, who has come into our house. And the women especially praised God for the gift of Ruth. Maya Angelou wrote, when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms. Slowly and always irregularly, spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration, our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be, and be better, for they existed. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life was a blessing. America is a better place, and we are better people because she lived. May she rest in eternal peace under the sheltering wing of God's presence. Unetana Tokef, page 174. Let us proclaim the power of this day, a day whose holiness awakens deepest awe and inspires highest praise for your dominion. For your throne is a throne of love, your reign is a reign of truth. In truth, you are judge and plaintiff, counselor and witness. You inscribe and seal, you record and recount. You remember all that we have forgotten. And when you open the book of memories, it speaks for itself. For every human hand leaves its mark, an imprint like no other.
Kibne Maro ותיבתו, כן תעביר ותספור ותמנה, ותבכון נפש כל חי, ותחתו קצבה לכל בריאה, ותכתוב את גזר דינם.
And so a great shofar will cry Tekiah, a still small voice will be heard. Angels in a whirl of fear and trembling will say, Behold, the day of judgment, for they too are judged in your eyes, even they are not blameless. All who come into the world pass before you like sheep before their shepherd. As a shepherd considers the flock when it passes beneath the staff, you count and consider every life. You set bounds, you decide destiny, you inscribe judgments.
בראש השנה ייכתבו ביום צום כיפור, ביום צום כיפור ייכתבו.
Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many will pass away from this world? How many will be born into it? Who will live and who will die? Who will reach the ripeness of age? Who will be taken before their time? Who by fire and who by water? Who by war and who by beast? Who by famine and who by drought? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangling and who by stoning? Who will rest and who will wander? Who will be tranquil and who will be troubled? Who will be calm, who tormented? Who will live in poverty and who in prosperity? Who will be humbled and who exalted?
O Teshuvah, O Tefillah, O
Through return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of the decree. You are everything that we praise you for, slow to anger, quick to forgive. You do not wish the death of sinners, but urge them to return from their ways and live. Until the day of death, you wait for them. You accept them at once if they return. Since you created us, you know our impulses. We are but flesh and blood. We are mortal. Our origin is dust, and dust is our end. We wear out our lives to get our bread, like broken vessels, like withered grass, like a flower that must fade, a shadow moving on, a cloud passing by, mere dust on the wind, a dream that flies away. But for you, ever-living sovereign, time has no limits. Your presence, unbounded by days and years, is everywhere. A glorious mystery none can decipher. Your name is worthy of you, and you are worthy of your name. And our name you have linked with yours. We rise for the Kedusha on page 184.
O
Please be seated. We continue on page 208 with Ritzei V'Mnuchatenu.
Eloheinu Eloi Avotenu V'Imotenu Ritzei V'Mnuchatenu Adeshenu B'mitzvotecha V'tinkelkeinu B'toratecha Sabeinu mitovecha V'samechenu B'yeshuatecha V'yankileinu Adonai Eloheinu B'ahava V'ratzon Shabbat Kodechecha V'yanuchova Yisrael Mikadashei Shemecha
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu Be'amecha Yisrael U'tefilatam be'ahava tekabel Tamid avodat Yisrael
We continue on page 210. God who is ours, God of all generations, to you we are grateful forever. Rock and protector of our lives, your saving power endures from age to age. We thank you and tell the tale of your praise, your power in our lives, your caring for our souls, the constant miracle of your kindness. Morning, noon, and night, we call you goodness, for your compassion never ends. We call you mercy, for your love has no limit. We call you hope, now and for all time. And for all these gifts, God of majesty, may your name come to be blessed and praised. Our gratitude a daily offering until the end of time. Inscribe your covenant partners for a life of goodness, and may all life resound with gratitude and faith in praise of your name. God, you free us and strengthen us. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulecha na'el lehodot.
Amen.
O God, divine presence whose path our ancestors walked, bless us now with the words first bestowed on Israel in the time of Moses and Aaron, the threefold blessing given us through Torah that joins our hopes with theirs.
Yevorechecha.
Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
May you know God's blessings of shelter and care.
Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha.
May you receive the light of God's kindness and grace.
Is Adonai panav elecha yasem lecha shalom.
May you see God's favor and goodness, and may you partake of God's peace.
Amen.
Israel,
At the dawn of his writing career, Mark Twain wrote a short story called Petrified Man. He described the discovery of a mummy in the mountains south of Gravelly Ford. Upon examination, it was determined that the deceased came to his death from protracted exposure approximately a century earlier. Every limb and feature was perfectly preserved. The body was in a sitting position. Its attitude was pensive. The way his hands rested on his face, it appeared that he might be thumbing his nose at the world. I kind of envision it like this. The people of the neighborhood volunteered to bury the man. But when they attempted to remove him, they discovered that the water which had dripped upon him for ages from the crag above had coursed down his back and deposited a limestone sediment under him, which had glued him to the bedrock upon which he sat. And the local judge refused to allow the citizens to blast the petrified man from his position so that they could give him a proper burial. Such a course would be little less than sacrilege, the judge decreed. And Twain concludes, everybody goes to see the stone man. As many as 300 having visited the hardened creature during the past 5 or 6 weeks. When Twain published this story, America was in the midst of the Civil War. Perhaps he was thinking of the Confederacy, hardened by its immoral certainty and thumbing its nose at the world. The unvarnished truth about America is that we have yet to give the petrified man of the Civil War a proper burial. He remains cemented to the bedrock of our country. He is still thumbing his nose at America. Petrified man, petrified of change. We have not fully atoned for our original sin, the horrendously evil idea that one group or a particular race is inherently inferior. Dehumanization is the ultimate logic of racism. Jews know this. The moment they defined us as an inferior people, without regard to what we believe, they could do with us as they pleased. The road to Auschwitz was paved with the sediment of supremacy. Centuries of scorn spread on the highways, byways, and railways of Europe. Racism subverts every principle of religious thought. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, to think of a man in terms of white, black, or yellow is more than an error. It is a cancer of the soul. From its first words, Judaism insisted that every human being created in God's image has equal moral worth and equal moral standing. Have we not all one Father? Malachi insists, Halo el echad bera'anu. Did not one God create us? Madua nifgad ish be'achiv. Why then do we betray one another? Halo chivnei chushim atem, said Amos. Black human beings, all human beings, of every color, are equally precious to me. Shchora ani v'nava. I am black and beautiful, wrote the poet of the Song of Songs. The American tragedy is that white supremacy outlived both the victors and the vanquished of the Civil War. It outlasted post-war Reconstruction. In many ways, we are still fighting the Civil War. We are still trying to reconstruct America. We've made progress, even dramatic progress. We do not have slavery. We no longer sick German shepherds on freedom riders or diners at lunch counters. But we still have racist dog whistles that create havoc and let slip the dogs of culture wars. There is still systemic racism in America. Racial reconstruction is our country's unfinished business. Take, for example, the debate over Confederate statues. A statue is just marble or iron and cement. In and of itself, it does not depress voting, create economic disparity, or cause unequal health outcomes. It does not jam its knee on the neck of a descendant of slaves, slowly snuffing out the candle of life. But it is not enough to write laws abolishing slavery. Custom must also be transformed. The custom of venerating leaders of the Confederacy is maddening. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis, and their cohorts were traitors. The Confederacy was secessionist, seditionist, and supremacist. There were not two morally acceptable views, with both sides containing some very fine people. There were taskmasters, and there were emancipators, perhaps personally flawed, but on the side of the angels. They honor God by redeeming the captive. As Frederick Douglass said about Ulysses S. Grant, a man he knew had many frailties. In him, the Negro found a protector, a vanquished foe, a brother, and an imperiled nation, a savior. I'll never forget my feelings of revulsion in Kiev, in seeing a statue of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the Cossack leader who massacred tens of thousands of Ukrainian Jews, ripping babies from their mothers' wombs, burning 300 Jewish villages to the ground. The destroyer of our people granted a place of honor in Kiev's Central Square. And I remember thinking to myself, hatred of Jews will never disappear as long as custom elevates petrified savages to stone seats of reverence. For these reasons, I state proudly and without reservation that Black lives matter. It's important to say, because the truth of American history is that Black lives mattered less. When we wrote that Americans are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we did not mean Black Americans. When we wrote, we, the people of the United States, we did not mean American slaves. They were not full people in our eyes. They were 3/5 people. When we passed the post-war 13th Amendment outlawing slavery and the 14th Amendment conferring citizenship on former slaves, it still took a century to eliminate legal segregation. When we enshrined the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the right of former slaves to vote, it still took 100 years to overcome intimidation, violence, lynching, Jim Crow, poll taxes, and literacy tests, all designed to suppress African American suffrage. Highly paid political wizards still practice the dark art of voter suppression. The evil that men do lives after them, Shakespeare wrote. The failure to reconstruct America in the 19th century bequeathed unreconstructed racism, even to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th generations. We can overcome. We have it in us. The history of America is the story of liberty becoming ever more conscious of itself. But we will never surmount the racial breach without a willingness to step into and repair the breach. This is what most people mean when they say Black Lives Matter. This is what most protesters, most corporations, most public officials, most rabbis and ministers of every race mean. We mean that we are committed to a full racial reconstruction of America. We mean that we want to make America great for all people. We mean that we want to push forward, not backward. We mean that no person's elevation requires another's degradation. When we say Black Lives Matter, we do not mean the condescending accusation that white lives, Native American lives, Jewish lives, Asian lives don't matter or matter less. We do not mean that we support the small minority of activists who perpetrate violence. We condemn them unequivocally. They distract from the righteous cause. Some are not even members of the local community. Their goal is either to sow division or simple looting. The rule of law is freedom's central precondition. Freedom was enshrined not on the far side of the sea, but at Sinai, the mountain of the law. We cannot live in this city, nor can any American city, town, or hamlet long endure when lawlessness, violence, destruction, and mayhem prevail. The rule of law is the thin veneer that protects us from chaos, anarchy, and destruction. In 21st century America, as in 20th century America, any movement for social justice must be nonviolent if it is to succeed. And we should all internalize this. It's the central principle of American democracy, because many millions of us might soon have to go out onto the streets in peaceful but insistent demand to uphold the results of the November election. When we say Black Lives Matter, we do not mean that we agree with a few who seek to demolish, who yearn to dismantle the economic and political infrastructure of America, who have lost faith in America's ability to live up to its highest ideals. To the contrary, we mean that we are on the side of those who seek and are prepared to work for a more perfect union. We mean that it has not been decreed in the heavens that America should be forever divided by race. The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. Those of us who are white do not really know what it is like to be black in America. It is in the nature of human life. We internalize that which is internal to us. Open your heart. So many black Americans worry every time they leave their home. When their teenage and 20-something children are out on the town. When they walk into bodegas or stores. When they jog in the neighborhood. Imagine if you lived that way. How would you feel? The beginning of morality is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. This is what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. Listen to our fellow Americans and try to understand. Their experience with law enforcement is not our experience. Even something as innocent as bird watching in Central Park can be fraught with racial tension and potentially life-altering, if not life-threatening, consequences. Doesn't mean that we should defund the police. I don't even know what that means. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You shall appoint judges and officers of justice, the Torah commands. There is no rule of law without law enforcement. But even the law enforcement community agrees that there is substantial reform that can, should, and must be implemented in police departments. Open your eyes to the disproportionate deaths from COVID-19 in communities of color. Give heed to the poverty, underemployment, and unemployment, unequal access to health care, housing, educational, and economic opportunity. The black community cannot resolve these injustices by itself, nor should it. These are not simply black problems, they are American problems. A prisoner cannot release himself from prison, the sages teach. Others must turn the key and unlock the door. Who knows this better than the Jews? We have been abandoned so many times along the way. So often we yearn to be heard, to be helped, to be saved, for someone to unlock the door of our prison. Take sides. Judaism commands us to take sides. Stand on the right side of history. Stand on the side of freedom, fairness, and dignity. Stand on the side of liberty and justice for all. Ve'avarta shofar trua b'yom kippurim, ukra'atem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshvea. Sound the shofar of freedom on the Day of Atonement. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants. Jews cannot be silent, nor can our synagogue, for two reasons. First, because Judaism insists on liberty, dignity, generosity, charity, empathy for all of God's creatures. Chidlu, hara, limdu, heitev, tarshu mishpat. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Put away your evil doings. Learn to do well. Seek justice. Relieve the oppressed. Plead for the disadvantaged. Judaism is an activist, involved religion. Pursue justice. Relieve oppression. Plead for the poor. There is no such thing in Judaism as abstract theology disconnected from the real lives of real people. We do not speak exclusively of God in heaven. We bring heaven to earth through social repair. The second reason we cannot be silent is Jews also have an interest, a self-interest, in the well-being of others. Jewish history establishes conclusively that wherever and whenever insecurity is widespread, when there is economic distress, social unrest, or political turmoil, Jews suffer disproportionately. We cannot be free unless everyone is free. We cannot be content while discontent pervades. And thus, since politics is how free societies determine policies, we cannot avoid the political process. We would lose integrity. We would be unable to look ourselves in the eye. What kind of religion could maintain credibility lamenting the sufferings of the persecuted, but not care about the policies that lead to suffering or the measures that can alleviate suffering? What kind of religion offers beds to the homeless but is unconcerned about the policies that cause or exacerbate homelessness. The Jewish people has an historic alliance with the African American community, born of our common experience of suffering and empowered by our shared hopes of deliverance. When we say Black Lives Matter, we mean that we find in each other common cause, common decency, common humanity. When we say Black Lives Matter, we mean that we have each other's backs. We do not mean that we supported the noxious anti-Israel position of the Movement for Black Lives platform, published 4 years ago, characterizing Israel as genocidal. That actually felt to us like a stab in the back. Nor do we think that most people, most African Americans, most of the protesters on the streets were even aware of that document, let alone supported its anti-Israel provisions. And in these very weeks, a summary of that document was redrafted, excluding the repellent anti-Israel claims. Dialogue works. Learning about each other works. Opening your heart works. Sharing your pain with good and fair-minded people works. The elimination of the anti-Israel statements was not coincidental. We are on the same side. The side of justice, righteousness, humanity. Still, it is important to point out that we liberals are often not vocal enough about anti-Semitism and Israel bashing within the American left. Our critics are right when they question our uncharacteristic reserve defending Jews from the excesses of the political left, while we are so loud and indignant defending everyone else from the excesses of the political right. In pursuance of the morally correct and politically important objective to join a broad alliance of social justice reformers, we cannot disregard vile, contemptible attitudes towards Jews. The very bigotry we decry when directed towards others. We cannot give the impression that liberal American Jews are willing to overlook, let alone forego, our intense commitment to Israel and our unwavering loyalty to the Jewish people. Liberal Jews can do both. Our choices are not binary. We can join the struggle for racial justice. We must join that struggle while distancing from those who peddle hatred of Jews. As we have seen in these very weeks through the modification of the Movement for Black Lives platform, we will persuade most. And those who are unpersuaded will eventually be discredited. What are we afraid of? Why the reticence? Why the reticence to condemn left-wing hatred of Jews? Israel bashing in the American left. It's not we who will be cast outside the tent. It is they, the intolerant, who will be marginalized. I'll give you an example from our own community. To the best of my knowledge, we were the only synagogue in our area to announce publicly that we were discontinuing our participation in the Women's March once its leaders began exploiting their platform to bash Israel and voice support for Louis Farrakhan. It was controversial at the time. We were the only synagogue. But subsequent events vindicated us. The original Women's March organization collapsed on its own. It could not sustain the internal contradiction of promoting social justice for all while preaching and tolerating injustice against Jews. It's gone. since we see more timid of left-wing anti-Semitism, since we don't have enough voices in the liberal Jewish community that condemns full-throatedly anti-Semitism from the left, it's important for the Jewish world and our allies in the civil rights and social justice movements to understand clearly what American liberal Jews believe. And I think I speak for the majority of us. We do not stand with those who seek to cancel Israel, who skirt with hate. It is unbecoming, unproductive, and unjust. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You cannot stand for social justice and tolerate injustice in your own ranks. During the summer, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a brutally honest op-ed about anti-Semitism within some quarters of the social justice movement. He lamented what he called the shocking lack of indignation at anti-Semitic attitudes of some sports and entertainment celebrities. He pointed to the creepy tweets, symbols and images of Jews that are responsible for the oppression of blacks, that Jews control the banks. He called out black leaders who not only refused to condemn, but actively support Louis Farrakhan, who he termed a notorious homophobe and anti-Semite. Abdul-Jabbar wrote, "It's impossible to take you seriously with regards to social justice or anything when you post anti-Semitic imagery. It's so disheartening," he wrote, "to see people that have been violently marginalized do the same thing to others without realizing that perpetuating this kind of bad logic is what perpetuates racism." This is what real courage looks like. This is what real leadership looks like. The ability to see moral principle clearly and the willingness to contend with those in your own ranks who distort the very principles that propel a righteous cause. Judaism recognizes that it is a constant struggle to remain morally vital. We ossify over time. We become glued to our ways and petrified of change. Judaism teaches that the highest obstacle to justice is not in our stars, but in ourselves. We refuse to accept personal responsibility for the wrongs of the world. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha befrikat ol, for the sins that we have committed against you by casting off responsibility. We become arrogant. Our tendency is to treat the disadvantaged as if their natural vocation was poverty or misery. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'einayim ramot, for the sins that we have committed against you by haughtiness. We become self-centered and self-absorbed. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'tzarut ain, for the sins that we have committed against you by selfishness. We stand aside while our neighbor bleeds, tolerating or even contributing to oppression. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha behona'at re'ah, for the sins that we have committed against you by oppressing fellow human beings. We develop moral heart disease. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha betimahon levav, for the sin that we have committed against you by a confused heart. Ve'al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'imutz halev, for the sins that we have committed against you by hardening our hearts. But Judaism insists that we can overcome. Ve'natati lahem lev echad, ve'ruach chadasha eten bekirbechem, ve'hisarti lev ha'even mibesaram, ve'natati lahem lev basar. The day will come that I will give them one heart. I will put a new spirit in you. I will remove your petrified heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Many of us are alive today because of the kindness and empathy of others, people who opened the doors of our prison and offered us warm embrace. We may not even have been born were it not for the sense of justice, the righteous indignation of someone who did the right thing, often at great personal risk, for no reason other than it was right. I learned this year that I would not be alive were it not for the generous heart and immense spirit of a woman I never knew. Several months before my mother died, she instructed my siblings who were traveling to Israel to clean out my parents' Jerusalem apartment not to forget to bring back a certain box. She described precisely where it was. She was already beginning to fade, but she remembered exactly where that box was, and she insisted several times, "Don't forget to bring back the box." She wanted that box in her possession when her time came. After she died, we opened the box, as she knew we would. It overflowed with 700 yellowed pages of her memoirs. The hidden details of her past, finally documented for her 4 children to read. My mother never elaborated on her childhood because, as she wrote, she did not want to traumatize her children. Parts of her life were so painful that she felt that if we were to learn of these when we were young, it would damage us permanently. When I learned of the contents of the box, memories from 4 decades ago flooded back to me. I would return from high school or army service, and I would see her in the kitchen table writing on her yellow pads. I hadn't given it much thought then, and none at all in the 40 years since. My mother described her Russian upbringing before, during, and after World War II. She, her 3 siblings, and her parents lived in an industrial city that few outside of Russia ever heard of in the Ural Mountains. Her family was so poor that the 6 of them lived in a 1-room barrack on the outskirts of town. She described the poverty, the deprivation, the numbing cold of Russian winters, the gnawing hunger that never dissipated. She described how during the war, people died of starvation on the streets. She described the terror of the Stalin years, how paranoia and brutality crushed the lives of so many of her neighbors. We never knew our grandfather. We finally learned the details in my mother's memoir. Like so many millions of others, Stalin's henchmen grabbed him one day and he disappeared. Decades later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the archives of that period were opened, and there our family read in the sterile language of NKVD bureaucracy, there was the proof. He was executed, not far from his home, 3 weeks after he was nabbed, leaving my grandmother alone to keep alive her 4 little children in the middle of a world war during a period of mass starvation. In reading of my mother's memoirs, I learned of Olga Gardievskaya. Olga's husband was also murdered by Stalin. Olga, not Jewish, and not related in any way to my mother's family, took pity on my grandmother and her 4 children. She would bring them food from the cafeteria where she worked. Food was so scarce that sometimes she would steal, like a Russian Jean Valjean. She broke the law to bring my mother and her siblings a loaf of bread. She would cash in her own food rations and give them to our family. My mother writes, in those days, I was too young to think about it. I took it for granted. But today, I often think, what a remarkable woman this was. She risked her well-being and her livelihood. She lost her job because of us when she was caught stealing. She risked her freedom, her life, to make sure we did not perish. Why? Now, my mother writes, as I think about these matters, it pains me greatly. I would like to cry out to tell Olga that we never forgot her. I am so sad that we never adequately showed what we felt for her. I hope that Olga is still alive, my mother writes in the 1970s. A woman like this deserves to live forever. If she is still alive, I know that she, too, thinks of us often. Oh, that our thoughts could meet and could embrace somewhere. She and she alone, more than any other, my mother writes, at great and terrible risk, is the reason we are here, to tell the tale. Several times when we were literally on the threshold of death, she single-handedly pulled us through. My mother writes, every time I think of Olga, tears come to my eyes. A human being so unique that I am frustrated at not being able to put it into words. I lament my limitations. I would like to write a poem, a masterpiece, to preserve her memory for all generations, to describe her, to honor her, to express the overwhelming feeling of gratitude that we feel for this human being. Olga, my mother pens her name in exclamation point. If I could write, I would write an entire book for her. My mother documents. I would sing praises. I would compose symphonies. I would build statues. I would do all this and more if I only had the ability. Instructing us, her 4 children, from the world to come, while we were still teenagers. My mother writes, if any of you 4 kids one day should be blessed in any kind of creative art, like music, composition, painting, or writing, do your mother a favor. Give prominence to this most unusual woman. I will give you the alphabet. You put together what's in my heart. Not only because she saved us, that too, but because the world is not yet all that bad, as long as there are people like Olga. I'm granting my mother her posthumous wish. But not only that, I'm honoring a personal debt that cannot be repaid. Olga Gardievskaya, the savior of our family. I didn't know Olga, nor had I even heard of her until this year. But she saved my mother. And thus, she saved me. She saved all the future generations of our family. The world is not yet all that bad, as long as there are people like Olga in it. In this, our most sacred season, never forget the fundamental truth of Judaism. Humanity is our common lot. We are all made of the same clay. We were born of the same void, inhabit the same flesh, and dissolve into the same dust. Do not harden. We are lev echad, one heart, one flesh. We owe our lives to those who lived faithfully and now sleep in the dust. Many of them are unknown to us. They rest in unvisited tombs. But the growing good of the world depends on these people. Bit by bit, generation by generation, they blast the rock of injustice from the cold seat of petrified man and lift the stones of indifference from our calcified hearts. Tzu ur'u be'ezo derech yeshara she'yidbak ba'adam. Rabbi Yochanan asked, what is the right path to which a person should cleave? Rabbi Elazar responded, Lev Tov, a good heart. A good heart presupposes and preconditions all other righteous qualities. Judaism gives us the alphabet. It is for each of us to put together the words in our heart. Amen.
We turn to page 223 for the Avinu Malkeinu, followed by the Torah service, and we rise.
Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Koleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha. Avinu
Adonai
The Torah reading for today is the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac, and can be found on page 240. Our first Torah blessing will be recited by Randy King Phillips and Carl Phillips.
Yom Torah.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Havarach.
Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'naten Lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Vayehi achar hadvarim haele v'ha'elohim nisa et Avraham vayomer elav Avraham vayomer hineni vayomer achna et binchad yachidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak v'lech lecha el eretz hamoria v'halehu sham le'olam al achar heharim asher omar elecha. וישכם אברהם בבוקר, ויחבוש את חמורו, ויקח את שני נעריו איתו, ואת יצחק בנו, ויבקע עצי עולה, ויקום וילך אל המקום אשר מלוא האלוהים. ביום השלישי וישא אברהם את עיניו, וירא את המקום מרחוק. ויאמר אברהם אל נעריו, שבו לכם פה עם החמור, ואני והנער נלכה עד כה, ונשתחווה ונשובה עליכם. ויקח אברהם את עצי העולה, וישם על יצחק בנו, ויקח בידו את האש ואת המאכלת, וילכו שניהם יחדיו.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'yahye olam nata b'tuchenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen. Our next Torah blessing will be recited by Alyssa and Adam Shapiro.
ידושני אברהם ואביגל, עלי השני.
Baruch et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, ונתן לנו את תורתו. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן. ויאמר יצחק אל אברהם אביו, ויאמר אבי, ויאמר הנני בני, ויאמר הנה האש והעצים ויעשה לעולם. ויאמר אברהם אלוהים יראלו עשה לעולם בני, וילכו שניהם יחדיו. ויבואו אל המקום אשר מלוא האלוהים, ויבן שם אברהם את המזבח, ויערוך את העצים, ויעקוד את יצחק בנו, וישם אותו על המזבח ממעל העצים. וישלח אברהם את ידו, ויקח את המאכלת לשחוט את בנו. ויקרא אליו מלאך אדוני מן השמיים, ויאמר אברהם, אברהם. ויאמר הנני. ויאמר אל תשלח ידך אל הנער ואל תעש לו מאומה, כי אתה ידעתי כי יראה אלוהים אתה, ולא חסרת את בנך את יחידך ממני. וישא אברהם את עיניו, ויער והנה איל אחר נאחז בסבך בקרניו. וילך אברהם ויקח את האיל, ויעלהו לעולה תחת בנו. ויקרא אברהם שם המקום ההוא אדוני יראה, אשר יאמר היום בהר אדוני ייראה.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tovenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen.
Our final Torah blessing will be recited by Stuart Shakir.
יעמוד שלישי.
Baruchu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer di nishpati nekum Adonai ki ya'al asher asita et hadabar hazeh velo chasafta et bincha et yechidecha ki varecha varechecha והרבה הרבה את זרעך ככוכבי השמיים וככל אשר על שפת הים וירש זרעך את שאר אויביו ויתברכו בזרעך כל גויי הארץ עקב אשר שמעת בקולי. וישוב אברהם אל נעריו, ויקומו, וילכו יחדיו אל באר שבע, וישב אברהם בבאר שבע.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher notan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam notai b'sachenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Please rise as we raise and dress the Torah and turn to page 242. Our Haftarah this morning is from 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, and this can be found at the bottom of page 252. Our Haftarah blessings will be recited by Danny Moss and Jill Rackmill.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai Abocher b'Torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'nbiei ha'emet b'tzedek.
ותתפלל חנה ותאמר עלת ליבי באדוני רמה קרני באדוני רחב פי על אויבי כי שמחתי בישועתך אין קדוש כאדוני כי אין בלתך ואין צור כאלוהינו אל תרבו תדברו גבוהה גבוהה יצא עתק מפיכם כי אל דעות אדוני ולא נתקנו עלילות קשת גיבורים חטאים ונכשלים עזרו חיל שבעים בלחם נזכרו ורעבים חדלו עד עקרה ילדה שוויה ורבת בנים אומללה אדוני ממית ומחיה מוריד שאול ויעל אדוני מוריש ומעשיר משפיל אף מרומם מקים מעפר דל מאשפות ירים אביון להושיב נדיבים וכיסא כבוד ינחילם כי לאדוני מקצו כארץ וישת עליהם תבל רגלי חסידיו ישמור ורשעים בחושך ידמו כי לא בכוח יגבר איש אדוני יחתו מריביו עליו בשמיים יראים אדוני ידין אפסי ארץ וייתן עוז למלכו וירים קרן משיחו
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Ser kol haolamim, Sadiq b'kol hadorot, Ha'el hane'eman, Ha'omer ve'oseh, Hamadaber umkayem, Shekol devorav, Emet v'tzedek, Al haTorah, ve'al ha'avodah, Ve'al haneve'im, ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, ve'al yom ha'zikaron hazeh, shenatata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu, liktusha v'limnucha, lechavod, ol tefaret, al hakol, Adonai Eloheinu, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד, ודברך אמת וקיים לעד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך על כל הארץ, מקדש השבת בישראל, ויום הזיכרון. Amen.
This is great. You know, as I said last night, I hope this is the first and last High Holy Days celebrated like this. But you can see we made an effort to try and bring in, nonetheless, members of our community. And Jill, it's almost like you were here. I know she's she's online, all of you, and the singing. And for those of you who are experiencing our services for the first time, it's still terrific, but come back next year or at most 2 years from now when we're all back together again in a conventional way like we've been doing it for thousands of years in Judaism. Speaking of, all kinds of creative efforts, so we were agonizing all summer about the shofar because you notice we don't have wind instruments. Unfortunately, our beautiful flautist can't be with us because we're concerned about the aerosols, as you know. And so essentially by midsummer, we had concluded that the shofar blowing is going to be all on film, all pre-recorded. Because that's what people were telling us about wind instruments and so on, and we didn't want to risk anything, even though the risk was small, to blow the shofar for a brief period of time. And then, towards the end of the summer, you won't believe it, but of all people, Israeli epidemiologists started to talk about the shofar. I don't know why Serbian epidemiologists didn't, or French epidemiologists, or British scientists, but the Israelis, they cared about this shofar. What happens on the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Because you don't fulfill the command of Rosh Hashanah. You do not fulfill the obligations unless you hear the sound of the shofar. So it's a big deal. And Israeli epidemiologists recommended put a mask on it. So that seemed to us a really elegant solution. And in any case, Cantor Singer is going to blow his shofar behind the plexiglass screen. I am going to blow my shofar into the ark. So the Torah and God will receive any aerosols that happen to come out of this mask, not you. And we still have our shofar blowing team, who I think might be coordinated in some way with us. No, you can't. You can't blow shofar. I'm talking about the shofar blowing team on the screen.
Yeah, you participated on screen.
Yeah, you're on the screen.
Yeah.
But I hope it works well. If not, you'll forgive us. It's all for your own safety.
So we turn, without further ado, to our shofar service, which you will find on an insert at the back of your prayer book. And we rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmor kol shavua Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Tekiah. Shavarim teruah. Tekiah. Shavarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah.
הרשת צפותינו ירב לפניך ערה וניצור הרשת צפותינו ירב לפניך ערה וניצור ודין ומזים עמית ומקשיב לכל תקננו
Shevarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shevarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah.
הרשת שפתנו ירוק לפניך,
הרשת שפתנו ירוק לפניך, ונישא. מבין ומזימתי ומקיף בכל מילתנו, ונקבל רחמים וברצון, צדק תקרותינו. היום ערך עולם, היום יביא במשכן, כל יצורי עולמי, כל יצורי עולמי, מתגלים, מתגלים, רחמם, רחמם על בנים,
Tekiah. Shevarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shevarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah Gedolah. The Torah to the Ark on page 276. After after which we go straight into Aleinu and the conclusion of our service.
Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nishma shemo levaro.
Turn to those who have departed from this earth. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We extend our sympathies to those who have lost loved ones in recent weeks. Marilyn Beltzer, Ruth Miriam DeVac, Diana Bauer Shikiar, Tamara Engel, David A. Englander, Melvin Kitzes, Susan Kustler, Barbara Weisenfeld. And we remember the following yard sites of the years past. Susan Bayless, Joseph Barretts, Elise Bloch, Sam Blum, Katie Davidson, Lillian Deutsch, Irving Dick, Gertrude Eisenstein, Berta Escalante, Sarah Fader Hershkowitz, Irving Genn, Saul Goldstein, Elihu Gottesman, Ella P. Green, Max May Greenspan, Max H. Horowitz, Aviva Kelton, Elsa Klein, Joel Lander, Fred Oppenheimer, Billy Joe Perelman, Abraham Rappaport, Sylvia Rosenberg, Claudia Schoenfeld, Marty Sklar, Fern Spandorfer Cohn, Irving Sturm, Elliot Tompkins, Joel Verbit, Emil Weiss, Louis M. Weintraub, Samuel Welt, Helen Yellen. And if there are people for whom you are saying Kaddish and you'd like to share their names out loud or in your hearts, please do so now. We turn to page 292 for the Mourner's Kaddish, and we rise as we are able as one community. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malachutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shemei rabbah mevorach leolam ulamei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh. V'yit hadar v'yit aleh v'yit halal shemei dekudesha barichu. La'ela u'le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran ve'alma ve'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Amen.
May the source of peace bestow peace upon all who are in mourn, and may we be a source of comfort to all who are bereaved. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Just a few announcements before we conclude. Well, this was fun for me. I really appreciate that you came. I also appreciate all of those, the majority of our congregation that did not come, many of whom are online, and along with many thousands of other people from all over the world, some of whom regularly check us out and join us online, and some of whom join us this year. I say to all of you who are home, avoid the synagogue if for any reason you're not comfortable to come to the synagogue. And for those of you who are here and are scheduled to come here, continue to do what you're doing, which is to wear masks and social distance, and we'll be fine. When we finish the service in a couple of minutes, if you can walk out of the sanctuary from the back to the front, so we can just do this in an orderly way, and don't congregate outside either. Just make sure you're socially distancing outside. For today, Tashlich will be virtual. We went and we pre-recorded that. It'll be broadcast at 3 o'clock if you want to participate in that. It's much shorter than what it normally is because hundreds of people usually take longer to get there and to do the service. We'll get back to that hopefully next year, if not 2 years from now. But for those of you here and online, if you want to participate in the Tashlich service, it's at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Tomorrow we will be here for the second day of Rosh Hashanah at 10 o'clock in the morning. Anybody who wants to come in must pre-register and then also sign out that health certification that allows us to know that you haven't been anywhere, that New York State requires you to quarantine, and that you have no symptoms of COVID-19. And if something arises, it'll allow us for rapid contact tracing. So everybody needs to pre-register and fill out that form. It's also on paper here, but the easiest way to do it is through the little app that we created. For Yom Kippur, just pointing out again, we're maxed out on Yom Kippur. For those of you who have pre-registered and are listening to me, whether here or online, if you pre-register just because you're not sure, if I can ask you to make a decision because you are taking the space of somebody else, let us know. If you pre-registered and you decide not to come. For those of you who have not pre-registered, we have maxed out, but we urge you to register nonetheless. Put yourself on a mailing list, and as seats open up, we'll contact you, and perhaps we'll have additional space. Yom Kippur morning is 10 o'clock, the same routine for that. There'll be adult study sessions throughout the day. I'll tell you more about that on Kol Nidre. The Yizkor, as I said yesterday, the one difference from what we normally do is Yizkor starts a little later. Next week it'll start at 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. And I mentioned yesterday, I want to reiterate again, we have many people who come just for Yizkor and then leave. We'd like to have you rethink that for this year. Because once you come and you sit in a seat, that seat can't be used for the rest of the afternoon. So we urge you to come. If you are prepared to stay for the entire afternoon service, which begins at 3, we'll get to the afternoon service at about 3:30 or so, and that'll take us through to Ne'ilah, and I expect that we will do the final shofar blast and the Havdalah and be finished about 6:45 or 7 o'clock. But it's a run-through, it's a straight-through. So if you don't plan on being here for the entire afternoon, call the office and ask for advice. Everything is online, and everything is online in special high-definition camera. So, and Rabbi Gluck is online as well, helping to create an online community of our worshipers and the big, broader world. So if for one reason or another being here is not for you, then join us online. And finally, I want to ask you to take care of yourselves. Don't enter the synagogue if you're not feeling well, for yourself, but also for everybody else. If you are experiencing any of the symptoms of COVID-19, stay at home and preserve your own health and the health of everybody else. I want to wish you and all those who are online with us a good and healthy year with many blessings. Cantor Singer, we conclude with
the Andrew Lipa special, Hayom Tam Seinu, as sung by Peter Yawitz. It's a bit of gospel, so you can all stand up and clap along with us. So please join us in clapping along with some old school gospel, Jewish gospel stuff.
Hayom, 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 Hayom Te'aseinu, Hayom, Hayom Te'vorenu, Hayom, Hayom Te'gadleinu, Amen, Hayom, Amen, Hayom Titrashenu L'tova, Hayom Tiktivenu L'chayim Tovim, Hayom Tishma Shabbatenu, Amen, Hayom, Amen, Hayom. העמים, ורצון את תפילתנו. היום תתמכנו במצדך, אמן, היום, אמן. היום, היום תעשנו, היום, היום תבורכנו, היום, היום תגלנו, אמן, היום, אמן, אמן, היום, אמן.
Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.